Okay, am I up?
You're up, Bill.
Okay. Just continuing then with the telling our story theme. The next section is really telling a story beyond the congregation and the church. And in fact, it's telling your story to the CRA and for public accountability. And unlike the last two sections, you don't really have much flexibility in how you tell this story. So the slide here is talking primarily about the T3010, which I'm sure, unless you're a new treasurer, you're all relatively familiar with. And that's your annual charity information return that you have to file each year. And it's one of a number of interactions you have with the CRA over the year. You probably have monthly or maybe quarterly source deduction transactions where you have to make sure you're remitting within the due date. At the end of the year, you'll have your T4s and T4As, picking up payments and contract payments and scholarships and whatnot. And then you'll also have GST related transactions. I think for most of you, it will be claiming your rebates. Some of you may be registered and some may have to pay GST. So the next slide, the annual charity information return, is kind of the what, who, why, and when slide. The what being the T3010 annual, who is filing with the congregation, and if you're relatively new to this, realize that T3010 is a standard form that any charity in Canada has to file with the CRA. If you go onto Canada, the CRA website, you can look at the T3010 information filed by any charity in Canada, including any Presbyterian church. If you put in First Presbyterian Church on the search list, you'll get a fair number of responses, and you can look and see what they filed. But the same form also applies to the likes of World Vision and the Heart and Stroke Foundation. So that form is catering to the very small congregation and the very large not-for-profit. And it's to provide accountability and transparency to people supporting not-for-profits. They're all due within 6 months of your year end, and I think most of us, not all of us, have a December year end. So June 30 is the filing date. You can file it as early as you want. Okay, and then moving on to the next one. In terms of this accountability, you have to be careful of your relationship with the CRA. And I would suggest that you always cooperate with the CRA and meet your filing deadlines. And if you don't, or if you have an issue and they send you a letter, don't ignore the letter, because they're bigger than you are, and you're going to lose in the end. So file and your T3010 on time. If you don't, the church's charitable status could be revoked. You'll get a warning letter, but I believe only one, and you could find yourself without a charity registration number by the end of the year, and then you'd really be in the soup. There is a penalty to get back on, but I'm sure that penalty, even if it is $500, is minute compared to the problems you would have getting your number back. So don't ever ignore any communication you get from the CRA. And there is a thought there. I don't know if you get your communications from the CRA by mail or online. The one advantage of the old-fashioned way and getting by mail, and hopefully them going to the church, is if anything happens, someone else sees that there's a problem. If you're getting them sent by online, if they're coming to your own email and something happens to you and no one knows that there's a problem, then there could be a really big problem. So watch how you communicate as a congregation with the CRA, and that if there are issues, it's not just a treasurer maybe who has a health problem who's is the only contact. And that's how the session, if you're a member of session or the board, should be asking the treasurer if to file those forms, in particular the T3010. It's the treasurer's responsibility to file it or whatever, but others have a responsibility to make sure they did the job. It's a critical thing to not overlook. Okay, the next one. Financial statements and accounting records that you need. This is what you're gathering together to prepare the T3010. Your information that this will probably vary from congregation to congregation. Some have a number of treasurers, a number of funds, others just have one set of books. And I'm from a small enough congregation that we basically have one set of books, one bank account, big investment account, fortunately. And so I don't have too much to pull together, but if you have a bigger congregation or you develop a number of funds, like if the Sunday school has a bank account or the choir or you do other activities, or maybe you do an overseas mission and you open up a bank account, all of that's got to be kind of brought together under the, through the treasurer to be able to file a the T3010 with the CRA. So there's could be a fair amount of gathering information before you can get going. And one more, next one. So you're gathering your own information and what's guiding you, what you need. The guide to completing the T3010 is the T3033. It's a very comprehensive document. It's available on the CRA website. They used to mail them out. I don't think they do that now. So you really have to engage on the CRA website, but it's open to the public. You can get any form you like there. You'll have to complete a form called a T1235, which the directors trustees worksheet. And we're going to have a little bit of a discussion, I think, on that with a poll later. We've noticed there's some issues around which directors, trustees, or like officials should be on that. Seems to vary, and I don't think it matters too much. Some congregations use their board, some congregations use their session, some include their ministers, some don't. Some just do trustees. Bearing in mind what I said earlier about T3010 being intended for every charity registered in Canada, the conventional thing is the closest thing you have to a board. And conventionally in a charity, the chief executive officer of the charity is not on the board, or is at least not a director, trustee, or like official. The other form you will have is a T1236. And I think virtually every congregation will have to fill in one of those, because if you make a donation to the Presbyterian Church in Canada, Presbyterian Sharing, World Service and Development, then that goes on a T1236. And of course, there's in the T3010 itself, there's kind of two forms: a simple for smaller entities, but it's really small entities under $100,000, and larger ones usually, and I think most congregations will complete the schedules 1 to 6 through the T3010. And I think that's, oh, I had one other one to add. There's something called a T1240, which is a registered charity adjustment request. And basically what it means, if you do make a mistake and put a wrong number in your T3010, you can get a T1240 and file for a change. And really all it is it shows a line number, and you show your original number and what the correct number should be. That can be done on paper or online. I think that's me, Karen.
Great. Before we move to Larry, actually, let's go back there. Heather, let's ask some of those questions that are in the chat right now.
Okay.
Sure. There are questions and comments, and some people in the chat have answered the questions, but I just want to give people the opportunity to ask them of you, Bill. What happens if you have no minister and no payroll remittances?
You'll probably, if the CRA, if you've had a minister and they've just left, the CRA may have an expectation. They won't know that, so they may be expecting you to continue making source deductions. So there's usually a communicating form you can use. So much has changed these days from what used to be in paper to what's online. Letting the CRA know that you now have no staff and there's no source deductions that you're remitting. It would just save them sending you letters asking where your money is. If you have no minister, but you have pulpit supply in the form of, say, other ministers or other people you're paying to come and come and preach, and you're paying them pulpit supply, if any one of them accumulates over $500 or more, then you have to issue a T4A. So you still have an ongoing relationship at the end of the financial year before the end of February to file your T4As, even if you have no minister. Does that answer the question?
I'm going to say yes.
Okay.
There was a bit of a discussion around being audited, and just a comment that audit process can be painless, but it requires preparation of required information and developing a relationship with the auditor because they're human as well. Okay, we currently have more board members than a usual board. Do we have to list them all?
I think that's one of the areas. If you look at the CRA website, you'll see some churches seem to have be run by 4 or 5 people, and some are run by 15 people.
I see Morris nodding his head enthusiastically up and down. Yes,
Yeah.
list them all.
Yeah. So I think it depends who's running you. There's no minimum and no maximum. It means more work for me every time our session adds a few people to because I've done it on the basis of session, and that's just my kind of cynical belief that the session can get rid of the board, but the board can't get rid of the session. So the session's really running the show. So I think your session members are who go on there, and I don't put the minister on, but that's the poll is coming up.
Okay, great. Just a couple more questions. Can a treasurer choose a donee, in this case, a church of another denomination, and send them money?
Yes, I'm not sure what you mean by can the treasurer do it. The treasurer should be acting on some decision of session or congregation before any designated money goes to out of the church. And technically a registered charity like a church can only donate money. You either use the money in your own mission, so to speak, or you donate it to another registered charity, which is a qualified donee.
Okay, I'm going to cut the questions off for now. And Larry's going to look at some of the line by lines in the T3010s that really issue questions.
Right. Well, thank you very much. One of the big questions is the congregation subordinate to a head body? Yes, they are to the Presbyterian Church in Canada, and you fill in the PCC's business number, which is as printed right there. Next slide. The question is how you do fundraising, and CRA is just curious. I'm not quite sure why, but they'll want to have you check off things such as 2530 collection plates. Maybe you do a little fundraiser. If you're a huge church, and there are some who have solicitations by the television programming they're doing, perhaps you have mail programs, you just check off what is appropriate for your congregation for that year. Next slide. Do you pay external fundraisers? Traditionally, no. My congregations are all medium and smaller. We don't pay anyone external to do fundraising, so it's a no.
We've had some congregations who've done capital campaigns when they've paid external fundraisers. So then they would answer yes.
That would be appropriate at that time. Next slide. Okay, does the charity, this is the question, does the charity compensate any of its directors and trustees or like officials or persons not at arm's length during the fiscal year? Okay, so this is the question of a lot of it is, are you listing your minister on your T1235? And if you are, clearly you pay your minister, and then you will put X, you would select yes. The thing is to be consistent. If you are not listing your minister on the T1235, then you may be checking no for this. So just judge your own situation and report it later in the appropriate compensation questions. Next slide.
Should we do the poll first?
Oh, I'm sorry. Here we are at the poll. Yes, please do that.
Karen, would you like to take over on that?
Have it.
Grace? Oh, there it is. It's up. Okay. So the question is, do you report the minister as a director or a trustee? We'd like to know.
We're just curious.
We thought you'd like to know, actually. That's why we decided to poll people. We're just letting everybody participate. Right now, we're up 52% participation. So click your answer. You still got time. All right, Grace, we're going to cut the poll off and provide the results. Okay, so it looks like out of the 64% who participated, 50 people out of 77 congregations that 32% of them report the minister as a director and trustee, and 68% don't report the minister as a director and trustee. So it does seem that it's fairly split among congregations.
Right, thank you very much.
We
But-
did have a quick question that does apply directly here. What if you don't know because it's your first time completing the form?
This is a matter that Bill was referring to. You make a choice. Are you going to list your minister as one of the directors or trustees or like officials? And if you do, then there's simply a follow-up. You will be completing or putting their stipend, salary, etc., into the appropriate financial section further on in the form. There's no right or wrong answer that we can determine here.
Yep, and I thought that was great. When we were prepping for this meeting, we had treasurers between Bill, Mort, and Larry. We had them do it different ways. And so nobody ever had a consequence for it as long as they were consistent and answering it as was for your congregation.
There are apparently no pros or cons. You simply need to be consistent, and you're reporting the salary in one place or another. So you're still doing the same work. Okay. Yes, back to, does the charity allow any of its donors to use any of its property except for permissible uses? This isn't esoteric. This is, are you allowing one of your donors to run a business in your one of your properties? 99% of us are going to say no. This doesn't apply to a member having a wedding or a funeral or a birthday party. These are all permissible uses. Next slide. Okay, in the past, it was very important to be careful about this, about charitable financial resources spent on programs outside of Canada. Now, this is exclusive of funds that you send to PWS&D or to international ministries. Most congregations will say no. You would check yes if you were directly funding something outside of Canada, whether through another charity, which is the best way to do it, or whether you have direct control. There are a whole pile of questions and details to be answered if you said yes. Most of us, we're not doing this, so it's no. Next slide. Okay, we're just focusing on, you know what your assets are and your liabilities. Buildings and land in Canada, you will be listing how you list them on your financial report, whether they are, so you're extracting this information from your financial statements, whether they're depreciated or not depreciated, whether they were cost basis or not. Simply be consistent and list everything. Most folks won't have capital assets outside of Canada, but if you did, for some reason, there's a place to put it. And then if you are, and then note that there's accumulated amortization of capital assets. If you are depreciating them, list that there. And then looking down at 4510, total amount received for other charities. This is important to note. Bill mentioned earlier, you either spend your budget on your own operations or you donate it to other registered charities. So it's either receivable items, contracts and payroll, or you're sending it away to PWS&D. That's a registered charity, which of course is the PCC, or to any of your favorite charities, food banks and Ratanak or whatever. So there are specific places where you break out your revenue distribution.
Now, this actually says total amount received from other registered charities. So it's if another registered charity gives your congregation money to help do the mission and ministry, which may be the case. Anyone who has received gifts of stock from the PCC and we've sent the congregation money, that gets reported on the line 4510. Or
Yes.
if we've given a grant or something.
This line is when you're on the opposite end, the other end of what I was describing. So absolutely, you do get a statement from the PCC that says, Joe donated stock, we have sold it on your behalf, and you on this statement they specifically tell you where to put it in, and it's line 4510. Thank you, Karen. Next slide. Getting down to total expenditures before gifts to qualified donees. Okay, there is your total on 4950. Then they ask you for an analysis of 4950. And in particular, sorry, I just have to blank out something here. In particular, they want that breakdown, and they're looking for admin costs. So box 5000 should be the vast majority of what it is you are doing. A charity should be spending vast majority of its revenue on its activities. You may wish to put in some of the pure administrative cost, and this is your judgment call. You will sit there and determine how much of the admin person's time was spent on pure administration as opposed to typing the worship bulletin, for instance. So then you can break down cost of stamps or items like this and stick that amount in 510, but don't be trying to show that admin costs are an extraordinarily high percentage, because the CRA does expect you to do charitable activities, not admin. And compensation. Okay. Total expenditure on compensation. This goes back to the question of, was your minister listed on the list of directors? And if it was, you filled in line 390 of Schedule 3, and you bring that number forward to 4880. Okay. Total expenditures, charitable activities. Wait, did we go backwards here? This again is the, sorry, this looks as though something we've done before. The expenditures of charitable activities versus management and administration. So what's the next slide? Okay. Property not used. Most of us would have nothing to put into property that's not used for charitable activities. If you do, they're simply looking for two values, 24 months before the beginning of the period, and in box 5910 is 24 months after. But it's hard to think of examples, and perhaps Bill could help me. What sort of property would not be used in your charitable activities? Your manse, if it's occupied by a minister, if you have a manse, is all part of your charitable activity.
Yeah, I think if you had, it's probably arguable if you had an old manse and the minister was now living in his own house, and you're renting out the old manse to someone who had nothing to do with the congregation. I think you could argue that that was, wasn't being used for charitable purposes. But there's a fair bit of description around this section in the T4033 guide to filling in the 3010. And it's basically, as it says here, properly not used for charitable activities or administration. So unless you have, extra properties, it's probably unlikely that you would have anything here.
Yes, and the rented out amounts, if you are using 100% of the revenue for your charitable functions, then that is a whole other discussion as well.
Yeah.
As opposed to, yes, we happen to run an independent business or own an independent business and a thrift store. It's a bit fuzzy. You really have to look into that particular one. Ian McDonald says we have part of our building rented out to another charity and we have no access to that. So that would be an example where you've leased out or rented out a big chunk of your building and you no longer could use it directly for your activities. Thank you. Okay. The smaller versus larger, this is not the charities, the CRA's cutoff of 250,000. This is actually small, as in your revenue is under $100,000. You can use the short financial reporting form, but if your revenues are over 100,000, then you go on to the more detailed list. So the short form is found on page 3 of your charities return of the T3010. Otherwise, you are into schedule if your revenue is over $100,000. So the left one is the short form. The right one is the larger schedule where you do more detailed reporting. So just point that out because it may save you some time. And making changes. I've had a lot of difficulty in the past communicating with the CRA about changing directors, changing owners, changing who may communicate with the CRA. This particular line here is to change a director. I would really urge you to keep your list of directors up to date. If you don't, you'll suddenly find that you have a list of deceased or folks who have moved on. And it's often difficult to deal with the CRA if you cannot get signatures of past directors or owners of the business, as they like to call it. So a part of your annual review should be to ensure that your directors list on the website is up to date. Next, please. Over to Bill.
Okay, I think it's me. Just to follow on from that last slide that Larry was talking to, we discussed that too in preparation, and that's you can be filling in your T1235 each year and telling the CRA who's new and who's left, but that doesn't change their old record of who was the original owners when you set up your, I don't know if it's your business number, and so that you get to notice it when you try and get online access to your account. That's when you, as a treasurer, you would get my business access, the same as you have my account access to your own personal taxes. But it's much easier to get access, as you can imagine, to your own online taxes than it is to get onto an organization like a church. And when the church has been going for a while, like Larry says, the apparent directors may be the guys who were around 10 or 15 years ago, and you're trying to get it updated. So it's the T1235 doesn't do it, unfortunately. Okay, moving on to the this slide. We're looking at what data you're taking from your financial statements and how they get put into two documents, the T3010 and the statistical return for the church. But we decided in preparation that we were leaving out the statistical return, so we'll just talk about the T3010 gathering of information, where it goes. And this slide is just saying gather your information in such a way that you can fit it into the CRA's T3010. And there's some, like any accounting process, you can have as many accounts as you want, but you're better gathering them into kind of logical segments, like having your mission accounts together, or your admin accounts together, or your HR accounts together. And then that's what will help you fill in the T3010. I go back to the comment I made earlier that the T3010 is an all-purpose form. It's not just the church treasurer that's filling it in, it's the controller or whoever at World Vision, he's doing his, and the Cancer Foundation. And so you can imagine that there's a lot of different types of financial statements been shoehorned into a T3010. So can we go to the next slide? Yeah. So this is showing the where some of the more common headings from your accounts or financial statements go in the T3010, and we'll just ignore the PCC line at the last column there. So you'll see that the line 4500 in the T3010 is where all the tax receipted offerings go. And we've made the comment there, and I'm not sure whether you do it or not, but you should. The T3010 line 4500 is one of the key lines that they're looking for, because they want to know how much you've issued as receipts. And so you really have to work with your envelope steward there. They're the ones who know the total of receipts they have issued. And they should be giving that to you. If they're sensitive, they don't have to give you detail, they just have to give you the total. But you should be able to reconcile your accounting statement receipted income to that, and that would be the number it would go into the line 4500. It may not, depending how sophisticated your financial statements are, it might not always be the figure in your financial statements, because if you've got something like designated offerings that you're saving for another year, someone's making a contribution to buy a new piano or something like that, and you're carrying it in your balance sheet. But this is actually one of those cases where the CRA is looking essentially for a cash accounting number. They're looking for how much you receipted in, we'll say 2021. So that's whether you actually record that as income in 2021, or whether you put it in your balance sheet, you have to kind of reconcile it to the number you get from your envelope steward or envelope secretary. So that's a key number. And when you think about it, your envelope secretary is issuing a tax receipt to you and everyone in the congregation who contributed. And that's the only copy of that receipt. It's not like a T4 where a copy goes to the minister and a copy goes to the CRA, and there's an extra copy, or a T5 or a T3 where there's extra copies. For the receipt that envelope steward's producing, that's the only copy. It goes to the person making the contribution. And while the tax credit varies across the country, it's somewhere around 50%. So for every $1,000 you give to your church, you could say revenue CRA, or it costs the federal and provincial treasuries about $500, because the aggregate credits, federal and provincial, are around 50%. So those receipts are really important pieces of paper. The other lines in there, I think, are relatively straight forward. We're giving you the boxes they go into, and I don't think I'd. Oh, the only one it's a little bit confusing is the last one there, but it shows GST refunds. That's very unlikely that you would have a GST refund in there if you're doing any kind of normal accounting for your GST rebates. You'd only have a number there if you were expensing your HST, GST cost, and then you were bringing the rebate in as a completely separate item. And I think that's, oh, the interest and investment income one, that, as far as I understand it, is interest in things like dividends and whatnot. If you've mainly had unrealized appreciation or depreciation in your investment, that's not the number. That number doesn't go anywhere. This is numbers that would be on a T3 or a T5, would be going to line 4580. Right. Oh, and if you had a capital gain, that's the same thing as the proceeds from asset disposition. There's two lines there. Proceeds from asset disposition. There's two boxes you put in the numbers to. They just want the eventually it's just the net gain that goes in there. So I think that's all I have on the income one. If you could move it to the expenses, thank you. And the expenses too are relatively straightforward. There's quite a bit of detail here, and it just shows that basically almost anything to do with remuneration is going into line 4880. Sorry, my phone's ringing here. Okay, the one I wanted to mention was one I got wrong, I think, when we were making the discussion. About 3/4 of the way down, you'll see a line there for debt repayments, and there's no number going in there. And being an accountant, we don't usually think of debt repayment being an expense item. But actually the CRA for line 4850, so says you can include mortgage payments. Now it's the principal part, the interest in the mortgage is like up there, a couple of lines up in line 4820. But the principal payment, you do show, and it should be in line 4850. So if you have debt repayment, then I was wrong in saying we don't need a number in opposite there for the T3010. It should be line 4850. And then the other thing I was just going to caution you on, there's a line there, you'll see other expenditures just above debt repayments with 4920 in it and a question mark. And line 4920 is an unusual one. I've seen people using it, and there are obviously some circumstances when you should, but don't use it just because you're not sure where something goes, because 4920 is meant for unusual and mainly non-charitable items. And there's a line 4930 goes with it where you have to explain what charges you put into 4920. So my own preference is to put nothing in 4920, and you can usually shoehorn any church expenses into those other the other lines in the T3010. Remember, the T3010 isn't designed for churches. It's not designed for large charities, or it's just designed for every size of charity across the country. So as long as you make an honest effort to fit stuff into those expense accounts, you're very unlikely to have any questions. I think Morris and I shared a couple of emails before the session, and I don't believe he's ever had a question on his filed T3010s, and I haven't had a question in mine. And I've done them for this congregation, and in my previous accounting life, I did them for a number of not-for-profits. And if they're filled in half like the thing, then I think it's unlikely you're going to have a question. So don't get too uptight about it. The one thing you want to make sure is, as I say, is in the income one, where you're recording your total receipts of donations. And I think that concludes my presentation, Karen.
Okay, we're going to be jumping into question and answers in a moment, but before then, just a few little housekeeping. Next slide, Jim. We do have a slide there with contact information. The website is probably the best way to find our contact information, but if you've got more questions, do feel free to ask us. If you've got questions for Larry or Morris or Bill, send the questions to Jim or I, and we will forward and get answers for you. And then just to remember that the recording, the slides, and the Q&As, we do copy the Q&As and try and put the answers for you, will be posted under the leadership seminars, and you're free to adapt and use this information as you'd like. And that's it for now. So we want to know, what more do you want to know? I'm going to turn it over to Heather to start us off with some of the questions that are still outstanding in the chat.